Hello, my name is Nadine. For 3 years, I woke up next to a man I trusted. I shared meals with him. I defended him to my family. I believed I was safe. Then a stranger leaned in and whispered, "Your husband is an imposter. Don't leave the house tomorrow morning." I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I kissed my husband goodbye the next day and stayed. What I heard after that didn't just break my marriage. It forced me to understand how many people had chosen silence while my life was being erased. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there right now? Because if you've ever ignored a quiet warning, this story might already feel too familiar. I've always been the reliable one, not the loud one, not the dramatic one. Just the one who showed up, stayed calm, and made sure nothing fell apart. Being the youngest does that to you in some families. You learn early that peace is earned by not asking for too much, by not taking up space, by smoothing things over before anyone else even notices there's a wrinkle. That night, we were all gathered at my mother's house in New Jersey. Early spring, the kind of evening where the air still holds onto winter, but the windows are cracked open anyway. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and lemon cleaner. Familiar, safe, loaded with history whether you wanted it or not. Mom sat at the head of the table, straight-backed, napkin folded just so. Loretta had always run her home like a ship that didn't tolerate waves. My sister Celeste sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, half listening, half present, the way she often was. And beside me sat my husband, Calder, relaxed, hands folded, expression calm and attentive. Calder had that way about him. People leaned in when he spoke, even before he said anything. Dinner moved along the way it always did. Small talk, updates, complaints about property taxes. Then Mom brought up the real reason she'd asked us over. She was thinking about refinancing the house, maybe selling in a few years. She wanted opinions. I listened first. I always did. Then, carefully, I spoke. I suggested she wait. Just a little. Interest rates were shifting, and selling too quickly might put her at a disadvantage. I explained it simply, without urgency. No pressure, just information. My words landed softly on the table, and then, nothing. Mom nodded vaguely and reached for her water. Celeste asked if anyone wanted more potatoes. The conversation drifted on like I hadn't spoken at all. A few minutes later, Calder cleared his throat. "What might make sense," he said gently, "is holding off for now, just until the market steadies. There's no rush, and it could give you more flexibility later." The room changed. Mom leaned forward. "That's exactly what I was thinking," she said, relieved. "You always see the bigger picture, Calder." Celeste looked up. "Yeah, that sounds smart." I sat there, my fork paused halfway to my plate. He had repeated my idea almost word for word. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and it just didn't register as important. I told myself it was fine. This wasn't new. It happened all the time. My thoughts passed through other people's mouths and suddenly carried weight. I reminded myself not to be sensitive. That word had followed me my whole life. Still, something tightened in my chest. Later, when Mom asked for clarification, I spoke again, quietly. I mentioned that I'd already brought it up earlier. Celeste smiled at me, kind but firm. "Let's not make it a problem," she said. "We're all on the same page." There it was, the rule, spoken out loud. Harmony mattered more than accuracy. Calm mattered more than credit. I nodded and let it go. That was my role. I'd learned it well. As the evening wore on, I found myself justifying it the way I always did. Calder was better with words. He sounded confident. People trusted that. It wasn't about me being ignored. It was about him being clear. That's what I told myself. But standing at the sink later, rinsing plates while their voices floated easily behind me. I felt something deeper than annoyance. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted from being erased so politely. Calder laughed at something Mom said. It came naturally to him, like he belonged in that room in a way I never quite had. His voice carried. People listened. I dried my hands and stacked the plates, moving carefully, quietly, the way I always did. Back then, I thought being overlooked was the price of peace. I didn't know yet that staying quiet was exactly what made me the easiest target. I didn't walk away from that dinner angry, just a little quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that lingers, not out loud, but in your chest. The kind that doesn't announce itself but settles under your skin, tight and warm like a slow fever. 2 days later, I slipped back into routine, like nothing had happened. Thursdays were usually mine, my errands, my pace, my timing. I liked having that control. I liked knowing which train I'd catch, which groceries I'd need, which leftovers were waiting in the fridge. Life made more sense when I could map it on a calendar or cross it off a list. I trusted things that could be explained. That afternoon, I left the pharmacy a little later than planned. The air had shifted. The kind of late winter chill that nipped your fingertips just enough to remind you spring wasn't quite committed yet. I cut across the park like I always did to shave off time, walking to the train station. I knew exactly how many steps it saved. I wasn't in a rush, but I liked being efficient. The park was just busy enough to feel safe. Joggers, parents with strollers, a few teenagers hunched over their phones on a bench. Nothing remarkable, just the texture of an ordinary Thursday. I saw her near the drinking fountain, young, maybe 20, struggling to balance a canvas tote bag that looked like it weighed more than she did. Something had spilled inside. She was patting it frantically with napkins that kept slipping from her hands. I didn't think. I just walked over. "Here," I said, pulling a pack of tissues from my coat pocket and holding them out. She looked up, startled, then took them without a word. "It happens," I offered with a half smile. "Paper cups, bad lids." She nodded once. Her eyes were wide but not frightened, just alert, like she was waiting for something. "No big deal," I added, more for myself than for her. "Hope it didn't ruin anything important." I turned to go. I had maybe 8 minutes before the next train, and I still needed to tap my commuter card. Then she said it, low, like she wasn't even sure she should. "You should check the house. The one you trust isn't the one watching your back." I stopped, not all the way, but just enough for my foot to falter on the path. I glanced over my shoulder. She wasn't smiling. She didn't look wild or angry or like she was trying to spook me. She looked resigned. "What?" I asked, more confused than alarmed. But she was already gathering her bag, wiping the spill off her jacket. Not another word. No hand outstretched, no pamphlet, no request for help or money or prayer. Just that one sentence, dropped like a pebble in a still pond. I walked away. Of course I did. My first instinct was to write it off as random nonsense. Some stranger with an overactive imagination or too many conspiracy videos in her feed. That part of town had its share of characters, and I wasn't about to let one odd moment derail my evening. Still, as I reached the station platform and stood in line to scan my card, I realized my pulse had picked up. The house, the one you trust, isn't the one watching your back. It was the specificity that bothered me. Not drama, not mysticism. Just a cold, clean line like something pulled from a sealed envelope. I sat on the train and told myself it was just coincidence. Maybe she said that kind of thing to everyone who stopped. Maybe it was part of some performance. Maybe she wasn't even talking about me. But then, she hadn't asked for anything. Not attention, not money, not even a reaction. She'd said it and walked away. I stared out the window, letting the familiar trees and storefronts blur by. I reminded myself, again, that I knew my life. I knew Calder. I knew what was real. He wasn't perfect, but he was steady, calm, good with my family, even when I wasn't. We'd built something solid together. Years of trust, of routines, of shared calendars and grocery lists and small, consistent acts. And yet, I still remembered her voice. Low, even, strangely matter-of-fact. It hadn't felt like a warning, it had felt like a report. I shook it off. I really did. By the time I stepped off the train and headed toward our street, I'd shoved it into the mental drawer where strange moments go. The ones that don't fit anywhere but aren't quite worth throwing away. Our house looked the same as it always did. Lights on in the living room, porch swept clean. Calder's car in the driveway. I opened the front door and smelled garlic and roasted tomatoes. He must have started dinner. "Hey," he called from the kitchen, like always. "You good?" "Yep," I answered, setting my bag down. "Just took the long way home." He leaned around the corner with a smile. "That's rare for you." "Felt like walking," I said. He went back to stirring the sauce. The TV hummed softly in the background. Our world, intact. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and watched him for a moment. Everything in place. No reason to question a thing, but I did. Not because I believed her, but because I couldn't forget her. I told myself that warnings only mattered if you believed them. I moved through the next morning like a woman in a play, every action rehearsed, every line delivered just right. The coffee pot clicked on at 6:15. My robe was tied the same way I'd always tied it. The mirror fogged up as I brushed my teeth, and I wrote the day's reminders on the calendar stuck to the fridge door. My handwriting looked steady. My breathing did too. Nothing had changed, so nothing could be wrong. I set out my clothes, packed my bag, double-checked my train pass. Calder came in from the backyard, rubbing his hands together from the chill, and dropped a kiss on my cheek like always. "You're up early," he said. "I've got a full morning, just trying to stay ahead of it." He nodded, heading for the shower. I heard the familiar rhythm of the water hitting tile, the squeak of the window hinge he never quite fixed. I looked around the kitchen, countertops wiped clean, mail sorted, dishwasher humming low. It was a house that ran smoothly, a life that did the same. What kind of woman second-guessed all of this because of a stranger in a park? I poured myself another cup of coffee, sat for exactly 5 minutes. Then I stood and started listing reasons. Not out loud, just in my head, in order like math. 1. Calder had a social security number. I'd seen it on mortgage paperwork. 2. He had a job, HR records, pay stubs, tax returns. 3. My family loved him, even my mother, who trusted almost no one. 4. We had photos, trips, years. The woman must have been confused, or maybe I had imagined it entirely. The whisper, the timing, the chill in my neck. I could have built that out of nothing. I hadn't slept well the night before. Stress did things. I walked upstairs to finish getting ready, passing the framed photo from our 3rd anniversary. Calder in a navy sweater, arms around me, that half smile of his that never reached too high into his cheeks. I remember that day. Cold wind, hot cider. We had laughed when the wind flipped my scarf into his face. That man wasn't a lie. He couldn't be. I straightened my coat collar in the hallway mirror, tied my shoes, reached for my bag. I even opened the door, the cold air brushing across my face like a reset button. Calder called out from upstairs, "Have a good day." "You too," I answered, stepping outside. I closed the door behind me. Then I stood still. For 1 second, 2, maybe 4. The sidewalk in front of me was damp with early dew. A squirrel scrambled across the neighbor's fence. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped as someone unlocked it. I walked 3 steps, then stopped. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag. I wasn't scared. I wasn't suspicious. I just paused, thought about how little effort it would take to go back inside. Not to snoop, not to accuse, just to observe, quietly. I turned, stepped back up to the door, unlocked it gently. The sound inside was different when I wasn't supposed to be there. It's hard to explain. But it was like the house had dropped a layer, the way you hear something familiar when you're no longer part of it. I didn't move far in, just enough to slip past the coat rack and press myself behind the partial wall that separated the entryway from the kitchen. I stayed there, still, breathing through my nose, slowly, listening. Upstairs, the water had stopped. Footsteps, the thump of a drawer, then Calder's voice, lower than usual, not raised, but different. Less rounded at the edges. He was on the phone. No, she left. 5 minutes ago. She always leaves on time. A pause. I told you she doesn't ask questions. That's the point. My throat tightened. Not panic, just pressure. The way your body reacts before your brain can spin a story to cover it. I leaned slightly to the left, careful not to creak the floorboard. Yeah, I can come by. Just give me the address again. Another pause. Yeah, that name's fine. That's the one I've used before. Name? What name? I shifted my weight, heart tapping at a new rhythm now, not fast, but sharp. Every syllable from him suddenly felt too loud, too rehearsed. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't whispering, he thought he was alone. I had never heard my own house this honestly. I didn't recognize the tone he was using, but worse, I didn't recognize who he was using it with. And what chilled me wasn't that I didn't know the answers. It was that I hadn't even known to ask the questions. Then he said it. I'll be there by 8. She won't be back till late. She never is. That was the moment I understood why the warning had been so specific. I didn't move, not even a breath deep enough to shift the air around me. I just stood there, glued to the thin space between drywall and silence, while the life I thought I'd built carried on, completely unguarded, completely honest. Calder's voice came again, lower this time, almost bored. Yeah, no, I've got it covered. She's predictable. The words sliced. Predictable. Like I was a route he memorized once and never needed to check again. I waited, heart steady but tight, for another line. Something, anything, to let me believe I was misunderstanding this. That it wasn't about me. But then, look, she has a stable job. Her family likes me. That's the point. I blend in. The air in the room shifted. I felt it before I understood it. Not fear. Something colder. Recognition. Like a puzzle you thought was missing pieces, until someone shows you the box was never yours to begin with. Calder laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just familiar. You worry too much. If something felt off, she would have said something, but she doesn't. He wasn't talking about a mistake or a plan gone wrong. He was explaining me, defining me like a useful object, a safe bet. I pressed my back harder against the wall, not because I needed cover, but because my body couldn't decide whether it still belonged here. He kept talking, casually dropping a name I'd never heard before. Use the same one from last time. That bank already cleared it. A name. A bank. My mind couldn't keep up fast enough, so it stopped trying. It shifted instead, away from the words and toward what they meant. This wasn't new. He didn't sound nervous. He didn't sound like a man stumbling through a lie. He sounded like someone who'd done this before, who had a system and a role and a script that didn't include me. I wasn't just outside the loop. I was the loop. The shield he stood behind while the real version of him lived elsewhere. My fingers began to tingle. I loosened my grip on my bag, not even remembering when I'd picked it up again. In the kitchen, I heard the scrape of a chair. Calder must have sat down, comfortable, at home. He thought I was gone. and I suddenly understood why it had always been so easy for everyone to believe him. Why, when he echoed my suggestions, they sounded smarter. Why my sister never questioned him. Why my mother called him solid, like it was the highest compliment a man could get. He didn't just use my silence, he counted on it. My entire family had been part of the disguise, not knowingly, but their trust, their certainty, it wrapped around him like a costume stitched from decades of calm dinners, holiday photos, and polite agreement. I had never been his partner. I had been his alibi. He never needed to fool me directly. He just needed me to stay reliable, predictable. I thought of every time I'd second-guessed my instincts because it would have caused tension. Every moment I'd let something go to keep things smooth. All the times I'd heard, "Don't make it a problem," and obeyed. I hadn't been stupid. I'd been edited. A rustle of paper snapped me back. Calder stood up. I could hear his footsteps now. One step, then another. I froze, but he didn't come toward the door. Instead, he said one more thing into the phone. Quiet, but it landed hard. She'd never believe it. That's the beauty of it. I pressed my hand over my mouth, not to stifle a sound. I hadn't made one, but to keep something inside me from spilling out anyway. Some raw, guttural feeling that didn't even have a name yet. What scared me wasn't that he was wrong about me. It was that, until 5 minutes ago, he hadn't been. I stayed there, motionless, while the call ended. I didn't try to catch a name or a number. I didn't scramble to memorize times or addresses. I wasn't in a movie. I was in my hallway, hearing the truth arrive in the quietest, most devastating way possible. I didn't know how long I stayed hidden. A minute? 5? He moved upstairs again. I heard the stairs creak, the sound of a drawer, maybe the closet door, preparing for the day like nothing had shifted. Because for him, nothing had. And for me, everything had. But I didn't leave. I didn't burst into the room demanding answers. I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call anyone. I stayed behind the wall, breathing like I didn't trust the air. Because the most dangerous thing you can do when someone thinks you're not looking is let them know you are. By the time the call ended, I knew I could never unhear what I had learned. I didn't rush out after the call. I waited until Calder went back upstairs, until I heard the bathroom door click and the water run. Then, and only then, I stepped out of the hallway like I'd just come in from the garage. I called up casually, "I'm going to head out a little later than planned. Left my charger in the car." His reply was so normal, so unbothered, that it landed like a slap. "Okay, no problem. Drive safe." I poured myself coffee with steady hands, sat at the counter, checked emails, all the motions of a regular day, because that's what he needed to see. That's what I needed to project. If I reacted now, panicked, accused, even questioned, I'd lose before I even understood what I was fighting. So I didn't react. I performed. By the time we both left the house, I'd slipped back into the skin he thought I wore, smiling slightly, keys in hand, jacket zipped to the top. I even reminded him to grab his lunch from the fridge. It wasn't fear, it was control. He pulled out of the driveway first. I gave it 10 full minutes before backing my car out, then I drove to the park and ride, like usual. But I didn't go to the office. I sat in the car with the windows up and the radio off, staring at the dashboard while the morning sun hit the windshield. Just long enough to think. Silence buys time. That was the phrase that kept circling. Time shows you things you missed. And now that I'd heard him speak in a voice meant for someone else, I couldn't unsee the details I used to call quirks. The way he always carried our tax paperwork in his bag, not mine. The way he insisted on being the one to talk to bank clerks or sign for packages. The quiet urgency whenever I offered to help sort mail. "No, I got it, babe." None of it screamed danger when I trusted him. Now it did. I drove across town to my mother's, like we'd planned. Calder had a separate errand to run. We were meeting up later for lunch. I arrived mid-morning, knocked twice, then let myself in like always. "Morning, honey," she called from the kitchen. "Coffee's still warm." Celeste was already there. Of course she was, sitting at the dining table with a stack of forms and a pen. She looked up at me, mild surprise in her face. "Didn't think you'd make it this early." I smiled like nothing inside me was shifting. "Had a change in schedule." The conversation moved fast. Some paperwork regarding Mom's property taxes, something about transferring a small account into a trust just in case. Mostly routine. But when Celeste said Calder said he'd help handle the signatures, something inside me folded. He hadn't mentioned this morning that he'd spoken to them about it. And yet, here he was again, volunteered, trusted, expected. I sat down, smoothed the edge of the paper, and asked, "Why Calder?" My mom waved her hand like I'd asked why the sky was blue. "He knows this stuff better than any of us. It's just signatures." Just signatures. The phrase echoed. It always starts with just. Celeste passed me a page. "You can sign here, but Calder needs to be the one to drop it off. They'll probably ask a couple questions at the bank." Of course they would. I didn't argue. I didn't push back or correct them or say, "You're handing legal access to a man I no longer know." I just nodded and let the scene play out. They gave him the pen, cheerfully, trustingly. Because why wouldn't they? And that was when it hit me. He didn't need to manipulate me anymore. He had the family's belief on autopilot. He could glide through approvals and decisions because no one thought to double-check him. Especially not me. I was his reference, his shield. And now, without lifting a finger, he was gaining access to more than my home. He was sliding into legal spaces where his name, not mine, held the weight. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but with clarity. If I called it out now, in front of them, "Don't let him sign that. Don't give him control," what would happen? They'd blink. They'd ask if I was okay. They'd pull me into a corner and ask what Calder had done. But the moment I said I overheard a call, the moment I said, "He's not who you think," they'd see a woman unraveling. And Calder would stand there, calm and measured, and say, "She's been under a lot of stress lately." I could hear it already. The soft voice of concern, the hands reaching for mine, the maybe take a break tone. They wouldn't mean harm, but they wouldn't believe me either. And if I stayed silent, the paper would go through. The bank would recognize his name. He'd gain another inch of control, and I'd be complicit through inaction. Either way, I lost something. So I chose a third path. I watched closely. I noted the date on the document. I looked at the routing numbers. I asked sweetly, should I keep a scanned copy for the folder, and tucked one into my bag. I smiled when Calder called to say he'd pick it up after lunch. I said perfect like I meant it, because I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building a file, a quiet, careful file of details, times, names, paper trails, not to confront, not yet, but to prepare. Because the moment I said a single word against him, I'd need more than suspicion. I'd need proof. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone speak over me. I understood then that the most dangerous thing I could do was speak too soon. And so, I didn't. The next few days passed with a quietness that wasn't peace. It was calculation, observation. I moved through our home like someone playing a part in a play they no longer believed in, smiling in the right scenes, nodding on cue, keeping my tone pleasant and my schedule predictable. But under that surface, everything had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was studying. Calder hadn't altered a single behavior since the call. That was what struck me most. He still folded his towel the same way. Still left the TV on while brushing his teeth. Still kissed my temple in the morning like he meant it. But now I watched him the way a person watches a magician, waiting for the sleight of hand. I began to notice small things. He double-checked his own email account more than he used to. He was more careful with where he set down his phone, always screen down. And sometimes, when I asked a question he wasn't expecting, I saw a beat of delay in his eyes, just long enough for him to choose the right version of the truth. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for cracks. And then came the moment that changed my posture entirely. It was a Saturday morning and we were standing in the kitchen. I was rinsing out the coffee pot, making conversation about nothing. An article I'd skimmed, a neighbor's dog, whatever filled the silence. Calder answered like usual, but then he looked at me. Too long. It wasn't a loving look. It wasn't absent-minded. It was quiet, sharp, evaluating. Like he was checking a reflection for a smudge. I didn't blink, didn't shift, but my mind sharpened. That look wasn't curiosity. It was calculation, and I knew. He was starting to wonder if I knew. The moment passed. He smiled, said something about needing to grab the dry cleaning, and left. But after the door closed, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and typed in his name. Not to search anything dramatic, just to see. I didn't expect anything. Men like Calder don't leave trails. But I followed a basic impulse, one I should have followed long ago. I started with property records. His name was on the deed to the house, of course, but when I cross-referenced it against a local title search site, a middle initial popped up that didn't match what was on our mortgage paperwork. It was subtle. One document said Calder J. Renshaw, the other said Calder T. Renshaw. Could have been a clerical mistake. Happens all the time. Except it wasn't. Because when I dug further, using free databases, county filings, even the alumni directory of a university he once mentioned attending, the inconsistencies grew. One listed a previous address in Georgia he'd never mentioned. Another had a different birth month altogether, just off by one digit, just enough to get overlooked. But that's the thing about lies. They never age as well as the truth. I felt my pulse in my throat, not from panic, from confirmation. He had edited himself. I sat back in my chair, hands gripping the armrest. For a moment, I almost stood up and went to find him. Almost walked straight out the door to wherever he was, dry cleaner, grocery store, wherever, and asked, "What's your real name?" But I didn't. Because something deeper in me knew a partial truth would protect him more than it would expose him. If I came at him with half a puzzle, he'd give me a story with just enough surface logic to calm me down. He'd pull on years of shared holidays and dinners and anniversaries like they were anchors, and I'd feel guilty for doubting. I couldn't afford that. I needed to be precise. That night, while he was asleep, I lay beside him and listened to his breathing. Slow, measured, a man at peace in his cover. I remembered how he'd charmed my mother with thoughtful gifts. How my sister Celeste once said, "If I ever get married again, I want someone like Calder." How, during an argument years ago about something small, money, I think, he'd apologized with such sincerity, I'd felt ashamed for even being upset. And I realized none of it had been accidental. He had built his story brick by brick. A perfect man, a stable husband, the one you hand the pen to because he reads the fine print for everyone else. But now I was reading the fine print. I spent the next afternoon parked outside a local office building, just down the street from the records department. I wasn't ready to go in, not yet, but I needed to see the place, to feel the weight of what I was chasing. Through the windshield, I watched people come and go, mail carriers, clerks, some young guy with a takeout bag. No one noticed me. No one knew I was the wife of a man who might not exist. I opened a notepad and wrote down the records I still needed to check. Social Security applications, marriage licenses, anything tying Calder J. Renshaw, or T, or whoever he was, to the world he claimed. I wasn't ready to expose him yet. But I was done pretending he was real. If one name was false, then everything I trusted was negotiable. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was afraid of what Calder would do, but because I didn't yet know what I would. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the documents I'd found like a slideshow. A different initial, a mismatched birth year, an address in a state we never visited. Alone, each one could have been brushed off. Together, they whispered something undeniable. The man I married had constructed himself. I moved carefully through the days that followed, keeping my rhythm steady. Same breakfast routine, same smile when he walked in the room. I even asked about his day like I cared about the answer. And I did care, but in a way that felt more like surveillance than affection. Then something shifted, not in what Calder did, in what he let others see. It started small. He joked with my sister on the phone about how I'd been a little off lately, just tired, you know. Then, with our neighbor Nancy, he said, "She's been quieter than usual. I think she's got too much on her plate." His tone was always light, always affectionate, but each time he planted a seed, and people love watering seeds. Soon enough, I noticed it in how people spoke to me. There was a softness, a measured tone, like they were speaking to someone fragile. Celeste brought over soup just because, but stayed only 15 minutes. My cousin Lisa suggested I take a few days off from thinking too hard, and my mother, who hadn't visited in weeks, called 3 times in one afternoon to check in. I realized Calder wasn't arguing with my perspective. He was rearranging it, not with lies, but with implication. By the end of that week, I could see it clear as day. The story wasn't Nadine is uncovering something. It was Nadine might be unraveling. And here's the cruel part. I hadn't done anything different. I was calm, measured, focused. But now, my calm was the red flag. The quieter I became, the more convinced they were that something was wrong with me. One night, after dinner, we sat on the couch together, the TV murmuring some sitcom neither of us was watching. Calder reached over, rested his hand gently on my knee, and said, "You know, if you ever feel like you're carrying too much, you can lean on me, right?" His voice was warm, sympathetic. But I saw the trap inside it. If I accepted comfort, it would become evidence that I was weak. If I rejected it, I'd be proving I was cold. Either way, I lost a little more of the version of me people once believed in. Social isolation doesn't come with sirens. It arrives as kindness, concern. People stop including you so you can rest. They change the subject so you're not overwhelmed. Conversations taper off, not with anger, but with patience. And still, I said nothing, not to my sister, not to my closest friend, not even to my own reflection, because if I said it wrong, even once, I wouldn't get a second chance. Then came the moment I almost folded. I was sitting alone at a cafe just off Maple and 3rd. Calder was supposed to meet me, but got held up at the office. I watched people come and go, mothers with strollers, students in headphones, retirees trading stories with quiet ease. No one was watching me. No one saw that I was unraveling at the seams, slowly, privately, with restraint mistaken for composure. For the first time, I considered walking away, not from the cafe, from the fight. What if I let it all go? What if I accepted this version of reality Calder had crafted, where I was the unstable one, the worn-down wife who just needed rest? I'd keep my home, my social circle, my dignity, at least on the outside. Peace was still available, if I surrendered the truth. That thought sat with me for too long. And then, just as I stood up to leave, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in years, Elowen Pike. We weren't close friends, barely more than acquaintances. We'd worked together briefly on a community project maybe 8 years ago. She'd moved out of state, gotten remarried, and vanished into a new life. But her message was short, precise. "Are you free to talk? 5 minutes." I hesitated. Then I stepped outside and called her. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what was happening. She simply said, "You're not imagining this. You're just the first one who noticed." That one sentence knocked the air out of me. She didn't need to know the details. She recognized the shape of what I was living, the gradual erosion of reality, the subtle manipulation, the strategic kindness, the way people begin to question your reactions before they ever question his intentions. "You're not crazy," she repeated. "You're just first." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because it wasn't relief. It was validation. And validation, for the first time in weeks, was enough to hold me upright. We talked only a few minutes longer, vague references, cautious wording. She didn't push, she didn't need to. Her tone carried what mattered. I was not alone in this pattern. When I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the cafe window. I wasn't broken, I was prepared. And that changed everything. I stopped asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" And I started asking, "How do I stop this from happening again?" That was when I realized this wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It was about stopping something that had already outgrown our house, our family, our history. And it wasn't just about Calder anymore. It was about anyone who trusted him next. 3 days later, I found out he had filed something under my name. A transfer of joint assets into a trust. His signature, his timeline. Mine missing. I read the filing 3 times on the attorney's portal before the weight of it hit. He hadn't asked me. He hadn't mentioned it. And now, on paper, it looked like I had consented. I could already hear him say, "She must have forgotten. She's been under stress." That was the moment I understood. Waiting wasn't caution anymore. It was permission. So I acted. I didn't ask for a family meeting. I didn't loop in my sister or try to explain. I didn't run it by my mother. I found a quiet attorney 2 towns over, one who didn't know my last name, didn't ask about Calder, didn't blink when I said, "This needs to stay off everyone's radar for now." We met the next morning, early, in a plain office above a florist. Her name was Mara, mid-40s, sharp voice, kind eyes. She let me speak uninterrupted for 23 minutes. Then she asked, "Are you looking to prove wrongdoing or prevent damage?" "Prevent," I said. "Good. Proof takes longer. Damage moves fast." We began gathering. Records, bank statements, business filings, insurance changes. I didn't have everything, but I had enough to show patterns. Timelines, names that didn't match, signatures that looked too clean. Mara didn't praise me. She simply said, "Let me do the talking." But Calder wasn't standing still. I should have known that. The day after our meeting, he filed for a power of attorney in case of medical emergency. His tone at home was warm, concerned. "Just a precaution," he said over coffee. "With everything going on in the world, we need to be smart." He even smiled when he said it, like he was doing me a favor. That same evening, he pulled my cousin Clara aside at a small gathering and asked if she'd check in on me more. Said I'd seemed distant, disconnected. Clara later texted, "He's just worried, Nadine. He loves you. Don't push him away." He wasn't denying anything. He was just getting ahead of it. That night, I didn't sleep. But I didn't spiral either. I organized. I printed every document with discrepancies, highlighted misaligned dates, labeled timelines, cross-referenced every asset move in the last 6 months. And when the appointment came to sit in a mediation room with Calder and a neutral third party, I said almost nothing. I didn't accuse, I didn't cry. I let the system speak. Mara handed over the folder and spoke clearly, methodically. We're not alleging fraud at this time, but we are asserting misrepresentation of consent. The supporting documentation suggests a pattern. We're here to request formal review and immediate freeze on joint asset movement. Calder didn't yell. He smiled. I think she's overwhelmed, he told the mediator. Honestly, this feels like paranoia more than anything else. He slid forward a packet of his own, screenshots of my late-night web searches, voicemails where my tone sounded brittle, even a printed text thread with my sister where I'd written, I feel like I'm losing my grip. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw the doubt flicker in the mediator's eyes. I felt my chest tighten. But Mara stayed still. She pushed forward the dates, the filings, the mismatched names, the duplicate addresses under false business entities. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. And slowly, the room changed. The mediator shifted, rechecked pages, paused longer before moving on, asked Calder to clarify more than once. His answers got shorter, then sharper, then rehearsed. And that's when it happened. He looked at me, not as a husband, not as a man trying to soothe or manipulate. He looked at me like an opponent, and I saw something crack. His jaw tightened, his smile dropped. He realized this wasn't about conversation anymore. I wasn't the audience. I wasn't the buffer. He'd been speaking to people who were trained to notice tone, to track inconsistencies, to verify, not believe. The mask fell, quietly but completely. Afterward, there was no grand confrontation, no shouting in the hallway. Calder left first. I waited in the lobby until Mara gave me the go-ahead to go. Later that evening, there was a family gathering. I wasn't supposed to come, but I did. I watched Calder tell a story across the room. Something about a car battery dying. Everyone laughed. He was still charming, still generous with his attention. But when his eyes met mine, something flinched. Not fear, not guilt, recognition. He knew. And I did too. I had crossed the line, the one between perception and evidence, between suspicion and documentation. I didn't feel victorious. There was no joy in any of it. But I felt settled, because I didn't need them to believe me. I needed this to stop. What I didn't know yet was how people explain themselves after the truth is no longer negotiable. Turns out, they do it quietly, with long pauses, soft voices, sometimes a nervous smile, other times a weak shrug, like they're waiting for you to tell them it's okay. But I wasn't handing out comfort anymore. By the time the legal matters wrapped up, Calder was gone from my daily life like furniture you forget was ever there until the imprint remains on the carpet. The court's decision was clean. He lost access, influence, and any authority tied to my name. There was no dramatic gavel slam, no gasps in the room. Just signatures, sealed copies, and a plain, "That'll be all." He left the building without looking back. No one chased him. No one wept. And somehow that quietness hurt more than if he'd shouted. In the days that followed, I waited for relief to come. It didn't. Not like I expected. Instead, I woke up in a new apartment, smaller, brighter, easier to keep warm, and felt the weight of absence. Not just his, but mine too. All the parts of myself I had silenced to stay married, to stay digestible. Victory didn't feel like a parade. It felt like an empty inbox, a quiet phone, a life paused mid-sentence. 2 weeks later, the first family member came knocking, not literally, but with a carefully worded voicemail. Then another sent a text. "We didn't think it was that serious." A cousin wrote, "He fooled all of us." Someone else said, "You should have said something sooner." I didn't answer right away. I walked to the edge of my balcony instead, cold mug in hand, watching a neighbor walk their dog, birds picking at the snowmelt, just Life going on, without commentary. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were trying to protect their own peace by erasing their part in the silence. And I got it. I really did. But I wasn't going to help them rewrite it. The next time I sat across from my sister, she lowered her voice like we were being recorded. "You know, I never meant to doubt you," she said, fiddling with the napkin in her lap. I looked at her, not coldly, just directly. "I did speak," I said. "You just trusted him more." She blinked, swallowed, said nothing for a long time. We paid the check. She hugged me longer than usual. We didn't talk about it again. And that was enough. I didn't owe anyone a polished story. No replays, no emotional autopsies. Surviving something doesn't make you responsible for narrating it. I let people have their versions. I just stopped participating in them. Calder didn't spiral, not publicly, no headlines, no meltdowns. He got quiet. He stayed out of sight. Whatever lies he'd spun didn't hold up in places where the facts had to match. He didn't lose everything. Men like him rarely do. But he lost the room. That was enough. There was no joy in it, no glee. Just a kind of balance I hadn't felt in years. People still ask if I forgave him, some more boldly than others. I don't flinch at the question anymore. Forgiveness, for me, isn't about freeing him. It's about freeing me from the expectation to carry his consequences. So no, I didn't forgive him, but I stopped bleeding over the cuts he never admitted to causing. My new place has creaky floors, a view of the library across the street. I have fewer things now, but everything in here belongs to me. I say less, but I notice more. I keep the door open when it should be, locked when it needs to be, and I don't explain either choice. People call me kind, and I am, but not blind. Kindness isn't softness, it's precision. It's choice made with your eyes open, not your heart closed. Some nights I still think about that whisper, that quiet intuition from months ago, the one I ignored. Funny how warnings don't come with sirens. They come in pauses, in gut flinches, in the part of you that doesn't need proof to know what you know. I used to dismiss that part of me. Now I protect it. Because in the end, I didn't rebuild my life by being louder. I rebuilt it by finally listening to myself.